Thank you, Fred. I'm often accused of trying to boil the ocean. And, it takes a lot of matches to boil the ocean. But I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be in Colorado. I've had the pleasure of working with 3 governors in a row, and it's been delightful to be in their office and to understand their perspectives and to see what is actually happening in the state of Colorado. It really is a shining star in the firmament in terms of how energy is being approached holistically, systematically, and responsibly. And I often look at how Colorado is moving forward, how Texas is moving forward. And you have a model here in 2 states that if the United States of America would understand the importance of energy to the economy of this country, we'd be in a different position. I testified earlier this year in the House Energy and Power Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee to suggest, as bluntly but as politely as I know how, that if the United States of America would simply make a determination to produce the amount of oil that it used to produce in the 1970s and 80s, and in this country we have more oil than we'll ever need. Simple fact, more oil than we'll ever need. If we look at all the basins, all the reservoirs, all the opportunities, and of course we now know from a natural gas standpoint, we have more natural gas than we'll probably ever need. But if we simply made a commitment to produce the amount of oil we used to produce, 3 things would happen. We used to produce 10 million barrels. We're down around 7. And with the Gulf of Mexico shut down, and in the 3rd phase of the moratorium now, which are the NEPA lawsuits, which are challenging the permits that have been granted by the Department of the Interior. Phase 2 was the trickling out of permits. Phase 1 was the total shutdown of the deep water drilling. But if we simply return to 10 million barrels a day, 3 things would happen. We'd use 3 million less imported barrels. And instead of building Bahrain, and instead of building Dubai and building Riyadh and restoring Iraq, we could actually do something in Cleveland, in Philadelphia, in Detroit. Because suppliers to the energy industry work there. And if they had the opportunity to expand oil production in this country by 1/3, dramatic things would happen. So 3 million less imported barrels has a huge impact on the balance of payments and where money is spent, domestic rather than foreign. Secondly, we create, ladies and gentlemen, 3 million American jobs. 3 million. And thirdly, the royalties from that oil is $30 billion to the federal treasury at a time when the treasury could use every billion it can get a hold of. That's the royalties. That doesn't include the income taxes, corporate and personal, of the companies producing that oil and the 3 million people who have high-paid jobs in America. But we can't seem to find our way forward. The perversity of partisanship is an internal enemy to the outcomes of the executive branch and the legislative branch, not just in this administration, but going back to Richard Nixon's time. And 8 presidents in a row have declared the importance of energy independence in this country. And we use more imports, not less, as time progresses. And 19 Congresses have tried to deal with energy. The most recent Congress, the 111th, didn't produce a single energy bill. The 111th Congress, in session for 2 years, a strong majority of one party in each of the 2 houses, plus the White House, not a single energy bill in the 111th Congress. Following on what had been the highest crude oil price in the history of America, $147.50. Not a single bill, because of the perversity of partisanship. And I'm not giving the Republicans any credit here. George W. Bush, as president, the so-called oil president, only began to move on opening up additional offshore opportunities in the 7.5 year of his administration. When he finally said in July 2008, for the first time, we need to open up more offshore. Thank you very much. What about the previous 7.5 years? So we have domestic resources, ladies and gentlemen, that simply aren't available. And we have more oil in the ground than we will ever need. But here's the real issue. My mission is not to blast government. Government provides a necessary and important public service to the nation. And I admire and respect Republicans and Democrats alike for their willingness to provide committed public service with many constraints, which many of them would love to see removed. But the constraints are what they are. Constraints such as 13 cabinet-level officers manage or govern energy in this country, 26 congressional committees govern energy in this country, and every federal judge at the bench could possibly manage energy depending on what case is brought before that bench. So there are many constraints. But here's the real issue. It comes home pretty quickly to the energy industry itself. I submit that this is the only country in the world that has the extent of adversarial relationship between the public, the government, and the industry, and the NGOs. The only country in the world where the path to cooperation and progress has been stymied and stopped repeatedly over and over and over again. And I put the burden right back on the industry. What does the industry do to make sure that the American public fully know and understand what's at stake, both on the production side, the supply of energy, the demand side, the use of energy, the risk management side from an environmental standpoint, land, water, and air, and from the infrastructure standpoint? I think the business model of the oil and gas industry, as well as all of the other industry suppliers, from the utilities to the wind and the solar and the geothermal and the hydrogen and the hydropower and the nuclear, the burden is on the industry, ladies and gentlemen, that if the public doesn't know and doesn't understand what's at stake, what's at risk, what's going on, what's happening, the 6 big words that answer all questions, the why, the who, the how, the what, the where, and the when. 6 very important questions that need to be answered to the satisfaction of nearly 300 million people. Well, maybe the infants can't understand it yet, but everybody else could, because it's not that difficult to understand. But the business model in the boardrooms of every energy company in the private sector have got to change the business model to understand, number one, there is no free market for energy. That's a myth, the myth of the free market. And it's been this way for decades. No free market for energy. Every aspect of energy is licensed or permitted or approved by either local or state or federal government. That's reality. And appointed and elected officials have a duty and a responsibility of whatever party they are a part of to make sure that the public's needs are met. That's the role of government. And if the public's needs for information about what energy companies do are not met, then they have a duty of care to do what they do, which is to govern, to regulate, to manage what does or doesn't happen. And so the energy industry business model has to start with a different priority. If they want to satisfy shareholders or satisfy owners in terms of return on investment and profitability, the business model has to change from the capital investment discussion and the cost discussion and the technology discussion to an area where the companies hate to spend time. But the starting point of the energy business has been, and will be public acceptance, public tolerance, public understanding. And if CEOs and boards of directors and executive committees of hundreds, if not thousands, of energy companies across the nation don't change the business model in their head to a discussion about how do we explain this, how do we communicate this, how do we describe this to the American public, the business model's broken. And government will do what government will do to protect the public interest. And if the public is fearful, afraid, doesn't want, can't tolerate, doesn't like, in a democracy, we know how that works. They have to respond to the people they represent. And whether their title is president or senator or representative, or whether they are appointees of a president of either party, whether they are a governor or a state legislature or a county commissioner, whomever they are, this is first and foremost a democracy. And the business model of energy companies in a democracy have to take into account the fundamental respect issue of the public that they interface with. And if that doesn't happen, well, the industry gets what it gets. I can tell a story about a CEO who I won't name, who said, "John, I hear you. Come on, I hear you. But frankly, if the American people don't want my gas, I know people who do." I'll tell you what, that attitude, that expression, deserves every bit of regulation you can stuff down that company's throat. The subtitle of my book is Straight Talk from an Energy Insider. And I think that kind of straight talk is necessary. In every boardroom in this country, in every executive suite. And executives need to be chosen for their willingness and their ability to interface to the public. Because you know what? Americans have the most mobility in the world. They love it. They love mobility. It's great. Whole industries are built up around mobility, personal mobility. The rest of the world wants the personal mobility that we have. China's endeavoring to build 5 million kilometers of new highway by 2020. What do you do with 5 million kilometers of new highway? You load it up with cars and trucks and buses. People want to move. We love transportation. You know what? We also love warm homes in winter and cool homes in summer. And the electrons or the liquid fuels that make that possible got to come from somewhere. And we love the lubricating effect of energy in the economy, only if it's affordable. And it's not affordable if it's not available. And we're struggling with the availability right now. Gulf of Mexico shut in. I predict that we'll see 1 million barrels a day of lost production in the Gulf of Mexico, because this isn't going to get straightened out anytime soon. The decision to close was a decision made that didn't take into consequence. How do you get it going again?